on the air, and this is the latest in our series of oral histories, and we're privileged to have with us today a gentleman who is a legend here in German Village, Mr. Pat Phillips.
Especially in my own mind.
Well, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Pat, welcome.
Thank you.
Pat, your experience in the village covers a wide variety of things, but let's start right at the beginning of where you grew up and your experience in the South End as a youth.
Yeah, you know, I kind of say I'm a lifelong resident of German Village. It isn't really true because I started in Marion Village, the next historical area south of the village. Going to St. Leo's as grade school. The school is no longer there, but the church is. And I was in that neighborhood till I was 23, and I was drafted into the Army. Drafted away from the High National Bank as a teller, and 10 weeks later I was a teller in the United States Army.
St. Leo's was a thriving parish back then.
Very. It had a lot of great people that went through there. My father always was very proud. He was an altar boy. St. Leo's, when it had a school, it originally had the church in the basement. And when they built the new church in 1913, I believe it's about then, my dad was an altar boy for the last Mass in the old church in the basement of the school, and then they walked across the parking lot and went into the new church, and he was an altar boy for the first Mass in St. Leo's Church. And I think he was born in 1903, so he would have been like 12 years old or 11 years old, somewhere in there, but he was really proud of that.
And Pat, what year were you born?
I was born in 39 and got out of St. Leo's in the 8th grade at 53, went from there, and then I started traveling through German Village on my way to Aquinas, which was downtown, or where Columbus State is today. So
you said one of the original buildings where you went to school is still there.
That's right. It's right in the heart of Columbus State. The Aquinas, they called it Aquinas College High School. It was supposed to be a preparatory for college. And they didn't do a very good job for me, but that's what they called themselves.
So here you are, circa 1953, going to school. Tell us how German Village differed from what we see today in 2013.
When I was going to Aquinas, a lot of the kids that I went to St. Leo's with went to St. Mary's High School. So I was around St. Mary's all the time, and that was really my introductory to German Village, before German Village. Quite frankly, it was probably 30 to 40% boarded up. And it was kind of lost. You know, the second and third generation had no interest in living there, and it just started rotting. And St. Mary's, though, it was a thriving high school, and Aquinas, the high school I went to, was a boys' school, so I had to hang around St. Mary's where the girls were. And most of my friends in high school age were actually from St. Mary's. And wasn't aware of this beautiful historical area I was in. Of course, I didn't find it. It found me. And then after high school, you keep all those friends, the South End friends, and ran around with them, and went to Ohio State for a little while, and then worked for the High National Bank 3 years, got drafted. And
where were you stationed?
I was part of the Berlin Wall buildup, and they sent me to the Western Front.
And where was that?
Colorado Springs, Colorado, which was really, take a flatlander out of Ohio and move him into the mountains. It was just incredible.
And you learned to do an activity out there.
I was a skier, and you really meet a lot of nice people skiing. And they had Colorado Snow Jets was the name of the ski club out there. So when I got out of the service, I was looking for that same type of social atmosphere, and lo and behold, Columbus has the Columbus Ski Club. Joined it, met a lot of great people, and I was the social director, kind of popular because a lot of the people there were aware of German Village and what was happening down there, and they knew I lived down here and I was from here. And a gal friend, a lady friend, said, you know so much about it, you ought to start giving tours. And she wrote out this very nice letter. It said, join me for into German Village. I'll stroll you down the brick streets. I'll take you to lunch and take you through some restored houses. And I joined the Columbus Convention Bureau. And they sent this letter out. First response, 150 people. Wow. What am I going to do with 150 people? Well, I get 3 Greyhound buses. I get 2 friends to... Buses hold about 50 people, so it took 3 of us. I did my speech on one bus and then transferred to the next and so on. And I took them, I think 75 of them I took to Dibbles, 75 of them I took to Planks on High Street.
Did Esther play the accordion for him?
This is actually before Esther.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then second response for this tour, 550. Oh my Lord, what am I going to do?
Are we in the mid-60s time frame?
We are in about, let's see, we're about 65.
Okay.
And I was able to handle that. Mr. Frank Fretch, the founder of the new German Village movement, was a friend, but he saw very quickly what was going on. This kid might be onto something. Tour of 150, tour of 550. I think it was probably $8 or $9, but I was making at least $2 a person. And so he calls the Columbus, let's see, not the Symphony, the Columbus Symphony, who had tons of volunteers. He told them they ought to give tours and do it for donations. They may have been a member of the Convention Bureau, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, they joined. If they hadn't been, they sent out their letter to do tours for free. I was out of business overnight. Along the same line, a few years go by, maybe 8, 9 years. Mr. Frank Fetch, still a friend, he resigns from the German Village trustees and resigns as German Village president. He rents what was an old filling station just north of Max and Irma's at the corner of Frankfurt and 3rd, the northwest corner. It's now an office building, but it was originally a filling station, a couple big bays. Mr. Fetch goes to England, buys a double-decker bus, has it shipped to Columbus, and now he's going to open the German Village Tour Guide Service. Mr. Frank Fetch goes to the German Village Commission, and he's laying out all his plans and everything. And lo and behold, the German Village Commissioner is Mr. Ray Phillips, my father. Frank does his spiel, and
Your dad had a memory.
And my dad had a very good memory. And Frank does his spiel, and my dad says, you know, Frank, I remember a young guy started something like this a few years ago. Frank Fetch folded up his plans, stood up, walked out of the meeting, sold the double-decker bus.
You said he didn't say a word when he left. He
didn't
just folded up.
Didn't say a word. And if you knew Frank Fetch, you could picture him doing that. Frank was a great guy, and he really started something good, and he was good at it. But he was a little bit political. He had a little undersided to him, and but maybe that was one of the things that made him pretty successful at doing the German Village.
Well, and speaking of that, and one thing not to be lost in the story of German Village, I think, is the fact that it grew and became what it is in large part because a lot of folks, realtors particularly, saw an opportunity to make something of it.
Oh, in the 60s, there was Virginia Welch. There was a gal from Arlington, I forget her name, and Pat Phillips. There was only about 3 realtors. It was a lot of fun. Real estate from 1965 to 1975 appreciated 1.5 to 2% a month. It was really easy and really fun. I mean, if you bought something and they were cheap and held it a year, you really basically made 25%. And if you held it 5 years, you doubled your money.
Well, we keep hearing stories of properties. It seems like in the early days, $3,000 to $4,000 was the going price, and those homes are worth 100 times that now.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think the last lot that sold in German Village probably sold for 125. But people, absentee owners, would come back 7 or 8 years later and, yeah, I'd like to sell my property, and oh, I bet could I get 1/2 what I paid for it? Yeah, I'll give it to you. And you know, and of course it was double or triple worth what it had been when they bought it, but they didn't stay up with the prices. And I got a little bit of a reputation. If Pat's got it for sale, it must not be good, because if it was any good, he'd own it. Of course,
Dad, you were right in the midst of this incredible increase in real estate values over a couple of decades. What do you attribute that to, that this outstripped the rest of the area so much?
Well, German Village, because the houses were nice and small and tidy, they were kind of easy to restore, affordable to maintain. The utilities didn't run you out of in the wintertime. And it was just, it met the pocketbook of a lot of people. And then they were aware of it, you know, because of the freeway expansion. It really basically destroyed 70% of German Village, you know, everything north of the freeway.
You can remember pre-freeway.
Oh yes, oh yeah. And that's, when I was going to Aquinas, I graduated in '57, so I was walking through Central Market to transfer buses, and you know, I was seeing all these things, and it was just, it was like a time capsule. It was like the old time movies you see today.
Central Market was kind of considered part of what would be German Village, right?
Oh, definitely. All around Central Market was houses that you see all in German Village today. And it was, of course, you know, it was usually open air market. You could walk through the center, but it was really more fun to walk around the edges of it.
Did your family shop there?
Oh, all the time, all the time. And knew several of the vendors. Groom's Meat Market, Thurns, the people who are still in business today, they had a place in there. And it would really been something if that could have been saved.
Here's another question I have about the growth in the 60s. At that point in time, so many people were fleeing from the inner city and going to the suburbs. How did German Village manage to reverse that and keep people here?
Well, really Frank Fetch did that. You know, the first and second generation, the kids wanted something better. They wanted the suburbs. And the people that could afford it did it. The people that couldn't, Phillipses, and tons of families just like us, we couldn't afford to leave. Blessings, you know. Then it all of a sudden became a jewel. And you'd like to say you discovered it, but it discovered you. And there's a lot of people that, you know, they feel they're responsible for German Village, but German Village is really responsible for them.
Pat, you're obviously a very gregarious personality, and that personality stood you in good stead in one of your early jobs down here.
The bartending?
Yes.
Yeah, it was fun to be a bartender. It was fun, it was like being a teller at a bank. You know.
Where were you a bartender?
I was the daytime bartender at Dibel's. I'd go in there at 11 o'clock, have lunch. I was the maitre d' and the bartender till like 1:30. And I'd leave there, and then I'd go to Planks at 11 o'clock at night. Went a little early so I could fix myself a dinner in the kitchen, and then worked till 2:30, and then cleaned up.
And for those who may not know where Dibel's was, that's Jaeger and Whittier.
That
now
is
Barcelona.
It is now Barcelona.
Tell us about the old Dibel's.
The Dibel's, the way it's situated right now is where the original bar was, and it went all the way back there, and it just had a ton of characters working there and a ton of characters as customers. While during that time there was a round table right towards the front, and that was the table for John Folder of Folder Packing. He would come there every day for lunch, and if he knew you, he would invite you to have lunch, and if you drank beer, they basically gave you lunch. Now this is before I worked there. And my dad, they were all Lions Club members. My dad was a member of the Lions Club, so I got to know a lot of those people.
This was a great joint, wasn't it?
Oh, it was fabulous. And the Dybel family, the daughter of that family is now a shirt-tail relation of mine. And she married a distant cousin of mine. And she called me years ago looking for a photograph of Dybels. She couldn't find any. I couldn't find any either, but I had a painting, and off to one side of it is Dybels, a guy, and I bought it from a guy who was an artist in the Columbus Ski Club, Ned Moore. Bought it for $25, and I gave it to her, and she just absolutely was tickled pink. It was like 45 years old when I gave it to her. And but Dybels, it was a very special place.
So my understanding is that your service as a bartender really led to your real estate career.
I already had the license. My dad was a real estate broker, and that kind of, I didn't have a college degree. You don't have a lot of avenues. And real estate is a good one to take, and my dad was already an agent, so I became a salesman for him. And it basically started at Planks on High Street, is where I started shaking.
You told me about Willie Plank kind of indignantly teasing you about you were making more money than he was in the restaurant.
Yeah, on one particular January, it was about 66 or 67, in Planks on High Street, there was 12 buyers and 12 sellers in there in a month. And I made 12 deals in 1 month. Willie Plank he was very happy for me, but he was, this has got to end, that type of attitude, but he was really kidding.
So that was a great period in your life.
Oh, it was fun. Columbus Ski Club, working at Dybels in the daytime, Planks at night, living in an apartment on 3rd Street. It was heaven. And
now, I didn't ask you about when you met your wife, and
I met my wife in, I believe, 68, and Planks on High Street was a big place for softball. After they played softball, they'd come to Planks and drink pitchers of beer. And my wife was a nurse, and she played on a nurse softball team, and I met her there. And then she kind of got interested in the ski club, and she started hanging out at the ski club, and we started dancing, and one thing led to another, and in November of '69 we got married. And 44 years later, this month,
don't forget.
That's right. I better head and forget. 29th.
Seems to have worked out.
It's worked out really well. Kind of a special life. And so much fun.
So you became at some point a realtor full time.
Yeah, after I got a little bit of rental property and had a steady income, working commissions only, you have a hard time ironing out the peaks and the valleys, one of the drawbacks. And when you have some little rental income, then yes, then I was a full-time realtor.
Tell us how you got into renting real estate. That was a good story.
Let's see. I had the 7-unit rooming house. Okay. when I was bartender at Planks, a realtor come in and asked if I knew anybody that was interested in German Village property. This is probably 65. And I told him I was. And of course I had nothing. But he showed me this 7-unit rooming house at the corner of Mohawk and Sycamore. It's the building on the southeast corner that has one doorway facing the intersection. We wrote a contract in October for $12,000, $1,000 down, and the lady didn't want to close until January for tax purposes. Well, I asked everybody. I know I asked Willie Plank. I asked my mom and dad, my brothers, my sisters, and if they could lend me $1,000. And you're not going to lend a bartender $1,000, and nobody would. The lady calls me in December and says, my accountant now tells me it'd be best to close the deal this year rather than next year. Is that a problem, Mr. Phillips? And I said, absolutely no problem. Let's just forget the $1,000 down payment. And she said, that's fine. So for $33, that's the deed in the abstract, I owned a 7-unit rooming house that now doubled my income as a bartender, and I was on my way. And then I was probably a bartender another 6-8 months, and I quit.
You need a little luck along the way sometimes.
Boy, you do. You got to be in the right place at the right time. That lady's name was Esther Stouch. She lived on Sycamore Street. When she sold me the rooming house, it had a light housekeeping license, which means that you had to share bathrooms. When she sold me that property, she said, you should have this. And she gave me a .22 pistol. She said, let it hang out of your pocket when you collect rent. And I did. Always got the rent. Never, and the gun was not loaded, but it worked. She knew what she was talking about. She taught me a lot of things.
Your first place you lived in German Village was at 7088 South 3rd Street with a gentleman by the name of Bob Lump as your roommate.
That's correct.
Tell us about Bob Lump.
Bob Lump, I really met him in the ski club. He was I sold them. I wasn't involved in the sale of the Dibbles, but he and another ski club member, Phil Henry, they bought Dibbles. And Bob was gone a lot, so he said, why don't you be my roommate on 788 South 3rd? And he was gone a lot because he built ski areas. So I was Bob's roommate, and I also worked for him as the bartender. And he was a great guy. And then another member of the ski club, he met her and married her. And then they later sold Dibbles to Jim Truman. And then they gave up the restaurant business, and Bob went on for a career in securities. I think he moved to Philadelphia with his wife. And Phil Henry, he married Nora Dorian, another ski club member. Nora lived in German Village on 5th Street for years. She now lives over at Thurber. For
those who don't remember, Jim Truman started Red Roof Inns, and also owned a race car that Bobby Rahal drove to the Indianapolis 500 victory.
1985.
And then died like a week after that great race.
Yes, he did.
And you knew him?
Very well. Jim Truman and I probably played golf 3 days a week. And his office was at 523 South 3rd. I sold it to him as a realtor. We became great friends. We did a lot of little things, real estate-wise. And he asked me to join him when he had 2 Red Roof Inns. This is kind of a nice story. I go into Jim's office. I'd made several nice little deals with him. He says, Pat, none of my friends in Arlington will lend me any money. I don't have any money for payroll. Can you help? I said, my house on Whittier Street, 136 Whittier is free and clear. Use it the way you want. And he borrowed $25,000 on that, and then at the same time he still owed me, he asked me to go with him and start traveling around the country to install Red Roof Inns. It scared me, because he still owed me the $25,000. So I said no. And Jim Truman went on to build 330 red roof inns. It'd probably been nice to have been a part of that, but things worked out okay anyway. And Jim Truman paid me back many times. And we were friends for a long time.
And also a gentleman by the name of Bill Dink, who we
Yeah.
know.
When Jim Truman came to German Village, he brought Bill Dink and Dick Robinson away from the Klingbeil Company as the part of the separation, and I got to know Bill Dink and Dick Robinson very well, and they were the first vice presidents to Jim Truman and part of the owners of Red Roof Inn.
If I say the words King's Rosewood to you, does that ring a bell?
No, King's Rose Garden, maybe.
Rose Garden?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that is now Lindy's. When it was King's Rose Garden, and there was a lot of bars like King's Rose Garden scattered, and they were kind of seedy, you know, and the property was owned by the Wagner Brewery Company, and they owned several corners around that were bars, and that's how they lasted where the other breweries died, because they would only let their establishment serve their beer on tap. And that, it was before my time, but the way I understand it, that kind of put the other breweries out of business.
They were the last brewery in the brewery district, right?
That's right. And about when I was 15, and like most kids in the South End or boys, you know, you're interested in girls and drinking, and so I started drinking.
That wasn't limited to the South End.
That's right. That's kind of international. And I started drinking at the Hey Hey, which is still there, when I was 15. When I was 17, they found out I wasn't 18, and they called all the bars in the South End and said the Phillips kid is not 18, so I had to drive to the North End to drink.
After you'd already drunk there for 2 years.
Yeah, I'd already been in there for 2 years. And at that age, you kind of do things you're not supposed to do. So a big thing was playing euchre and card games. And me and a friend, we had signals, and we basically cheated at euchre. It might have been probably a nickel a set and a dime a game. It could have been a dime a set and a quarter a game. I'm not sure which. On one occasion, and I think I'm 15, and my friend Joe Crispino, who lived over on Fifth Street, I think he probably lived at 615 South Fifth. The house is still there, and his older sister just died. Joe died at 30 years old in about 1970 from an unfortunate accident that caused cancer. But Joe and I was playing euchre, and we was playing these two individuals. A lot of times people would come from Kentucky or West Virginia, work in Columbus for the week, and then on the weekend they'd come back Monday. And a lot of them lived on the second floor of King's Rose Garden at Beck and Mohawk, and like a little bit like my rooming house down the street. It was paid by the week. And we were playing these two individuals, and we were cheating them and beating them a little bit, probably out of $1, which was $10 then or now. And a woman come up and said, "You're losing your paycheck again." And this guy says, "Get away from me." And she pulled a gun out and shot him.
Right in front of you.
Right in front of me. And blood everywhere, and tables and chairs go everywhere, and I went under the table. And what seemed like a lifetime, it was probably 15 minutes, and a police officer hit me on the rear end and said, "Sonny, you can come out of there now." And I walked out of that bar, and I never went back. And Joe, he got up and ran out. And that was my experience at King's Rose Garden. Later, it became the Lindenhof, restored by a guy by the name of Ted Dawson and John Kerr. And it later became Albert P. Grubbs. It was restored by Barry Zaks. And then later it was the Palmer House. I forget Palmer's first name, but he later became a Franklin County
Palmer McNeil?
Palmer McNeil. That's
Okay.
Palmer's house, and that's right. His McNeil was his last name. I was thinking it was Palmer was his, but then Palmer, I think he sold it to the Duties, and it is what it is today. You know, the Lindenhof.
Well, it sounds like it was a little bit with each new owner, particularly with Barry Zaks, who was involved with Max and Irma's.
Right.
It became a little more upscale than from the days of the Rose Garden.
Oh yeah. It was totally renovated, and I suppose most people know, but Lindenhof is named for a linden elm tree that was in the backyard. It was supposedly the biggest elm tree, linden elm, in the state of Ohio, and they named it after that tree, which is long since gone.
Did not know that.
Yep. And Barry Zaks about that time gets interested in buying Max and Irma's. He sent me in there to make that deal.
So you knew Barry?
Barry and I were great friends. I probably had 5, 6, 7 deals in German Village with him.
Tell us about his personality.
He, you know, when German Village is doing all this expansion and all these great values are coming about, it's attracting a lot of people. Like Jim Truman, like Doug Goodsell, Barry Zaks. When he first started, you know, he'd buy a double or buy a house, restore it, rent it, or sell it, and then he wanted to do bigger things, so he gets Max and Irma's, and then expands one out to the east side in the Walnut Hill area, and was doing really well. Then he buys the Claremont from the old founder of that, I forget his name, and so he was trying to upgrade his food business, like the King's Rose Garden, taking it to Albert P. Grubbs, and then but a great, larger than life guy, and fun to do business with, and like Jim Truman, he kind of outgrew Pat Phillips, but we remained good friends, and made a lot of fun with him. I mean, if you had a meeting with him, it had to be at a dinner table or a lunch table, and he always did his very best to make sure a realtor got paid, which was kind of a rare thing. And Jim Truman was the same way. If you were their friend, everything was great. If you were not their friend, things weren't so good.
Well, those were two great personalities in the business world, but there were two other personalities that are near and dear to German Village that you got to be friends with.
Yes, Fred and Howard. They were really well established in their Hausfrau Haven, and I for some reason wasn't good friends with them, but we went to a like a brunch at Mary Drudy's house, and they were there, and I'm standing at a table getting ready to get some food, and Howard walks up to me, and my hand hits him right in the crotch. And he said, "Fred, did you see that?" You know, kind of making a little bit of a scene, a funny scene. And from then on, I'll tell you, we were just about inseparable. The Drudys, Frank and Mary Drudy, Mary still lives on Whittier, Patty and I, my wife, and Fred and Howard, we went all over Europe together. They really, you know, they loved having younger people around. They really enjoyed having Patty around because Patty was a nurse. They felt like they was going to die at any minute, so they loved having a nurse around. And since they had Patty around, they had to have Pat around, and made a lot of real estate deals with them. They were really, really good to us, and they were really great friends.
You had multiple trips with them.
Yes. Spain, Turkey, France, Germany, And these were usually pretty big groups, and they were trips arranged by David Schooler. And David, nice thing having David do these, he would go along with us, and when David was on the trip, they kind of laid out the red carpet for David because he had sent all these people lots of clients. And it was a great experience with those guys.
What's the quality you remember most about those two fellas?
The quality, they never gave up. If they got their teeth into something, it was going to have to happen, and it was going to have to happen their way, and they were very generous, warm guys, and boy did they love German Village. And you loved it too. You gave back quite a bit to German Village in activities such as in Oktoberfest. Yeah, I think the first Oktoberfest was probably about '65. I'm not sure. And it was in Schiller Park. And a few years ago, some people were talking about it, and I said, sure, I remember very well. I was parade chairman. And they said, parade? You mean they had parades? I said, the first Oktoberfest had a parade in German Village. And nobody really remembered it. And I began to question myself if that was really true. And then somebody found an old film. And doggone, in that film, there I am driving around a golf cart because I was parade chairman. And it was a very nice Oktoberfest, but you couldn't drink in the park because that was part of the rules of Parks and Recreation, no liquor. And so all around the park, there would be vendors selling beer. And when people would walk away from the Oktoberfest, they would stick their empty beer cans on the wrought iron fencing with the spindles on top. And it upset a lot of the residents, and that's the reason it left German Village, which was a real shame. Today, of course, if they had it in the park, they'd probably serve beer in the park, and that episode probably wouldn't even have happened. But it was a shame because it was successful, and a few people got upset, but not really. They shouldn't have.
As a realtor, I know one of the things that's an attraction, particularly when you're bringing in people from out of town, are the great restaurants we have here. You've mentioned some of them. There's also Schmidt's and Katzinger's, and
oh yeah,
and you've had some experiences with those folks too, I believe.
Oh yeah. Many years ago, when my career first got started, and George Schmidt did the Schmidt House, what we know today, it was put in a building that they had owned as a result of their old packing company, which was right around the corner. And they did the restaurant, and the grandfather Schmidt, I think he was George too, he sold the Fudge House and the house next to it just to, probably in those days, to come up with money. And he had sold it to a guy by the name of Doral Griggs, who owned Sims Electric, which he was very instrumental in doing the electrical part of the contracting in a lot of houses in German Village. And so it got his interest too, so he bought those two buildings. And he wanted to sell them, and I listed them. And it was the first house swap I ever had. The house, we traded for a house in Bexley that was owned by Byron Kahn, and he made that his home and his gallery, and he was probably there for 40 years. But the commercial building on the corner, which is now Schmidt's Fudge House, Mr. Schmidt wanted to buy it. And when he went to the closing, he didn't want to pay a commission. He said, I can't pay a commission. I used to own that building. But we enlightened him, and he did pay me some kind of commission. But it was kind of funny, the old German. I owned it. There should be no commission involved.
You mentioned another establishment that's long gone, Schmick's Market.
Schumicks.
Schumicks.
Yeah, S-C-H-U-M-I-C-K. And the Shumick family, they went to St. Mary's, and they had been here forever, and they had a grocery store and a meat market in the Haus Frau Haven. that Fred and Howard developed. And they were a great family. They had a son, Larry, who I went to Aquinas with. And he was exactly my age, so he went from St. Mary's to Aquinas, where I went from St. Leo's to Aquinas, but we became pretty good friends. And they were offered to buy the building. It was $19,000, and they just said it was a wreck and they wouldn't buy it.
Huge building.
Huge building. That building is probably, let's see, 7,000 feet, maybe bigger. And Fred and Howard bought it, and the Schumicks kind of died out, and they, I don't know what they did for a living after that, but it really, it was a big loss, but a big gain, and time went on.
Pat, when you were in high school and coming to Aquinas through German Village, did you ever dream that German Village would have such an impact and imprint on your life the way it has?
None whatsoever. You know, I was coming through an area, a lot of boarded up windows. It was an area that Pat at that time thought if he could ever afford, he would probably leave. And luckily for me, I could never afford to leave.
And tell, maybe just as a summing up, tell us what German Village has meant to you in your life.
Mm-hmm. Well, it actually became my whole social world, probably half my financial world, my family. One thing that I think kind of helped me round off my life was I belonged to Groveport Golf Course. It let me leave German Village a little bit, which was probably a little bit of a good thing. Because if you gave something your whole life, its disappointments would kind of destroy you. And so I had a life outside of German Village, and the two lives together probably made it more enriching for both of them, if that's a word.
It is.
And now a wonderful wife, 44 years. We have a son that's 40. He lives about 3 blocks from our house. He's got a gorgeous wife who they have 3 little boys. They're with us all the time. And, you know, hopefully I'll die here in this nice atmosphere with all these great people.
Well, that's the way to go.
Can't beat it.
Can you think of anything that we should hit, either one of you?
Let's see.
You probably remember a lot about the streetcars coming through the village, don't you?
I remember really basics. I more than the streetcars, I can remember the buses that had they ran off of the electricity overhead.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the streetcars ran the same way, but I can't really remember the streetcars. I do remember horse-drawn milk wagons.
Really?
Yes. And this was, they would go down Bruck Street. I lived at the corner of Bruck and Phoebus, Marion Village. And the milkman, his name was Zimmer. And I ended up knowing his son, and I was the best man in his son's wedding, and his son was the best man in my wedding. But the horse it was a Borden's milk wagon. The horse would pull the den, the kids would get and ride in the thing. The horse never stopped, and the guy just would get off the thing, set the milk on the porch. The horse would go to the next house, just walk like he did it every day.
He'd set the pace.
Yeah, the horse was really doing the delivering. The milkman was setting it on the porch. But I can remember it. I don't think it's just in my mind. I think it really happened.
One thing that I never ask anybody about is I'm always interested in the old Union Station. Did you take trains out of there?
I went to the Union Station several times, and I don't think I ever had the pleasure of taking a train trip, but I'd go there to meet people. And I do remember in about 56 or 57, I had a gal friend who went to St. Joe's, a downtown girls' high school. And I remember taking her, or going with her to the Union Station. She was going on some kind of senior trip. And the Union Station, it was just gorgeous. And it was just like what you see in European movies, you know, where they have kept their train stations. It was an incredible place. I know it had little commercial shops going along High Street to the south, and there was vendors in there. I couldn't remember any of them, but I remember the Union Station very well.
Tell us about Eddie Dundon.
Okay, you may or may not know, I am a tour guide. I don't do many of them, but I try to do the ones they ask me to do. And when I take the buses around, I do my very best to stop in front of the Giant Eagle. And I tell the people on this site, was the first Ohio State game, football game. But prior to that, it was, they called it Recce 2. There was Recce 1 was on Parsons, and they were recreational parks that had grandstands, and baseball was really the big thing back then. And on this site, something really special in my mind happened. Going back to the 1860s, there was a big flu epidemic in central Ohio. As a result of that flu, a lot of children were born deaf in Ohio. And Columbus became a big center for teaching those deaf children. One of the buildings exists there on Town Street. It was an old deaf school. I understand there was another one on Parsons. I don't know if it is where at Main and Parsons. Not sure what that, but it might have been there. And the one that exists today is the campus up on Morse Road. Now, out of this first graduating class, which was 1882, there was an individual called Eddie Dundon. And Eddie was a very special guy. He was the most sought after pitcher in the United States for professional baseball. Now Eddie was, because he was deaf, he was an introvert and a shy guy, and he didn't want to leave Columbus, so he started playing with the Columbus Buckeyes. The Columbus Buckeyes, their home field was Recce 2 at the corner of Yeager and Whittier. Now Eddie, because of his handicap, he was always in arguments with referees. And this went on through his career, which wasn't long, about 4 or 5 years, I guess. So Eddie became a referee, an ump. So Eddie decided to end those arguments, and he was the founder of strike ball that they still use in the National Leagues today. And it happened at Yeager and Whittier.
At our Giant Eagle.
At our Giant Eagle. And the people on tour, they just love that story. And it's one of my favorite ones. Also, I like to, some of the tours are longer than expected, so you got to expand your thing. So I'll take the bus down Front Street and go by the ship up on the river, the Santa Maria. And right behind the Santa Maria is a plaque, and it tells the story of John Brickell. John Brickell was born in Stewart's Grove in Pennsylvania. When he's 9 years old, he is approached by an Indian with a musket who has another individual at bay. The individual tells John Brickell that this is a Delaware Indian and he is at war with the white people, and he wants you to come with us. This guy's a prisoner. Now John Brickell's a prisoner. He takes them to the Ohio River, crosses the Ohio River, and crosses most of the state of Ohio to an Indian village on the Auglaize River, which is where Wapakoneta, Ohio is. When this Indian takes John Brickell into this village, Wing-Wee-Poshies, which is the chief of the Delaware Indians, likes the kid and kind of adopts him and looks after him. Now Wing-Wee-Poshies is the Indian chief who signs the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. When he signed that treaty, the deal was you had to release all captives. So he gives John his freedom. Do what you want. So John Brickell wanders around the state of Ohio for a year or so, and he ends up building a cabin on the east bank of the Scioto River, and he becomes the first resident of Columbus. He ended up buying refugee lands that was going north from Broad to Buttles Avenue and High Street west to the river. And John Brickell died in 1848, and he had been a two-term United States Senator. Lived with the Indians for 6 years.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Isn't that a great story? Why wouldn't something like that be a movie? You know,
Really could be.
you see movies like The Last Mohicans and stuff like that. It could fit right in that category, I would think. That's another one of my tour guide stories.
That's great. I'm going to have to go on one of your tours. I'm enjoying it already.
Yeah. And of course, after about the time of John Brickell, you know, they discover Pete's Creek. Pete's Creek was the low spot in Front Street. And the breweries saw all this spring water. Let's start making beer. Like 7 of them. And they needed places for the workers to live. Then happens German Village. And here we are today.
You talk about the last of the Indians on this research into the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
I run into a story about the last of the Wyandotte Indians, a fellow by the name of Bill Moose,
Mm-hmm.
who lived till the age 99. And there's actually a Bill Moose Lane off of High Street up in the Clintonville area. Bill Moose was involved with the Buffalo Bill Cody shows and all
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Then he retired and he had left Ohio and then he came back and he set up a shack kind of just south of Morse Road. But he'd wander and trap and fish even into the 30s as an older man,
Mm-hmm.
and he lives till 99 years of age. He's hanging. The one reason I know about him as part of this research, he would come in full Indian headdress regalia into the clubhouse of the Wyandotte Country Club, now where the deaf school is, and they would feed him because he was kind of a conversation
Yeah, yeah.
piece. And everybody loved Bill Moose. And when he dies in 1937 at age 99, 10,000 people showed to his funeral.
Wow. It seems like I've heard a little bit. They've done, the guy, Ed Lenz, did a little clip on him, I think.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Well, there's an article I found online about him, but a fascinating story.
Mm-hmm. There, along the line of Indians, there was a guy, there's a brothers club. It's a group of guys, mostly South End raised or South End related. And we had a member, he didn't join our club till he was like 88. And he owned the golf course down by Groveport. It's down at the end of Richardson Road. I can't think of the golf course. But it was built on his farmland. And as a kid, they had an Indian that lived on their land who was left over from the Indians, and he was real old. And they didn't bother him. They just let him. He was camping in the woods on their farm until he died. And
remnants of another civilization.
Yeah. Isn't that
Pretty
wild?
interesting stuff.
Yeah, it'd be fun to know all those, all the real stories of those.
Well, I hope you enjoyed your interview.
I did.
Enjoyed it.
I enjoy talking about it. I really do. It's fun. It'd be awful if you didn't know anything about your history, and there's a lot of people wandering around that don't. And that.
Well, I think one of the things, and of course John did this before I did, got involved in it, but you just take it for granted, and then the people are gone, and you haven't captured their stories. And so we need to do this.
Yeah, my dad, he lived in a half of a double that was right next to the South High Street Viaduct. And he went to St. Leo's, and then he went to Commercial high school on Broad Street, and he left after seventh grade because his father had died, and he was the oldest one in his family, and he had to go to work. And so he had 7 years education, and he went to work for Seagrave, which was a company down on South High Street that built fire engines. And they built them, they shipped them all over the world. And Dad worked there till he was 25, and he joined the fire department and later became battalion chief for the South End. And he just had a million stories. He died in '89, and he talked about old times. He was kind of...
He was a realtor too.
Yeah, and then after he retired as a fireman, he became a realtor. And he had a neat little story. He had a scar on his leg, and he got run over as a child by a horse and buggy, and it broke his leg. And they put him in the buggy and took him to the hospital. And he had this little scar to show it, and he was actually kind of proud of it. And my mother, she was from New Stradesville, Ohio, and
That's southeast.
yeah, and she was the oldest of 11. My dad was the oldest of 7, and they moved from New Stradesville to Columbus in about I gotta say, probably 1915 or so. Her father never had a job. He was a prize fighter and raised fighting chickens and made moonshine.
And somehow made a living.
And they lived on South Fifth Street, and a neighbor of that was Bauman's, who became plumbing family. The Duckworths, my mother was a Duckworth, they were a plumbing family. And one of the Baumans told me one time they saw my grandfather come home in an Apperson Jackrabbit, which was, and I don't know if that's the right name or anything, but it was like a Rolls Royce. He had a top hat and a suit on, and he came home, and a month later he came home with no shirt and no shoes. He gambled everything all the time. They'd laid their life on the line at a minute's notice. But that family thrived, and there's a lot of Duckworths still in the South End today. My mother, when she came to Columbus, she was August Wagner's personal bookkeeper. Back in those days, you didn't have a secretary. Right outside your door sat your bookkeeper, because he wanted to know what was going on. And she was like 18 or 17, and she was a bookkeeper for August Wagner, the last surviving brewery.
Yep. Well, that's a way we've done a little supplement. That's good.
Yeah. And she was a great gal. She I don't know, the oldest of 11. She knew how to play the piano real well, could sing. And because of her bookkeeping background, she did people's personal income tax until well up into her 70s. My mother and father, and my brothers and sister, they were just incredible. It was just a nice, loving household, a great way to be brought up. And one really neat experience. I was by 7 years the youngest in my family, and I remember the milkman delivering. Do you remember the first whipped cream? It came in a little brown container, and you had to put a little thing on the top of it, and you pushed it to one side to get the whipped cream out. It was a new thing. And my house, we always had pie, and Mom's serving pie, and my brothers, they're putting their whipped cream on the thing, and it comes to my dad, and he's going to put it on mine. And I want to do my own. He said, okay. So I did mine, and I pushed it too hard. It bounced right off my pie and covered my dad's glasses. And of course, everybody at the table just roaring laughing. And of course, I got to laugh with them. So my dad says, "You think that's pretty funny, don't you?" I said, so he picked up my pie and put it in my face. And my brother picked up his pie and put it in my dad's face. And there's pie going everywhere. And my mother's running all around the kitchen. Stop it, stop it, stop it. It was just one of those little things you might see in a movie. It was really funny. But that was my dad.
You acted out well.
Yeah, my dad, he was that kind of guy. You think it's pretty funny, don't you? Well, this is really funny.
Yep, yep. Great.